This episode was brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for business. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to Unstoppable today, Arne Rubinstein. Arne Rubinstein is an ex-medical doctor, CEO and co-founder of the Rites of Passage Institute, a globally recognized expert on the Rites of Passage, which we're going to talk about today. He has over 30 years experience, I should say, as a counsellor, a mentor, speaker, and a workshop facilitator. The programs, seminars, and camps that he has helped to develop have been attended by more than 350,000 people globally, and some of the largest schools in Australia have implemented his frameworks effectively. The programs are designed to support boys and girls successfully make a safe and healthy transition into adulthood, almost like a lost art. His goal is to make Rites of Passage a mainstream once again, as it once was with our ancestors, I would assume. And in 2024, Arne was honoured with the Order of Australia Award in recognition of his impactful contributions to the well-being of our youth. Dr. Arne is a proud father of two wonderful young men and a mentor to many others, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Arne Rubinstein to Unstoppable. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Let's have fun.
Mate, I'm glad you said let's have fun, because look, it's not that I don't get excited for every guest. I do, but oftentimes the excitement can be quite emergent depending on the topic and the person that I'm speaking to. But I'm really excited to be speaking to you today for a few reasons. Number one, I'm a father. But number two, I'm also someone who was a child once and who feels like that there's many aspects of that child that are still inside them today that is growing and maturing and in many ways experiencing its own, maybe what I would suggest, delayed rites of passage as I become aware of my own maturity. I'm 50 this year, so it's been interesting, but I'd love to share that with you at some point.
You're in good company there, just so you know, by the way. Some of our major leaders in the world are still going through their emergent transition from childhood to adulthood and are somewhat stuck.
So let's maybe start with a really strong context, a really strong frame. I don't want to assume anything, but I would like to ask you what Rites of Passage is all about. And I'd like you to answer that question with a bit of perhaps cultural and indigenous historical depth to really give us a really solid understanding of what is a rite of passage, where did it come from, and then we can perhaps explore how it got lost.
Great. Well, a rite of passage at essence is a transformational moment. It's a shift from one stage of life to the next. So the classic, which is a great one to use as an example, is a child becoming an adult, a boy becoming a young man, a girl becoming a young woman. And that is a transformational process where once you've been through the rite of passage, you can't technically go back to where you were. So an adult can't go back to being a child. A mother who's had a baby can't go back to not having become a parent. Those events in our lives, they are transformations. And rites of passage have been practiced for tens of thousands of years in indigenous communities to support the transition from one stage to the other. And where people get a bit mixed up is they think, it's only about child becoming adult. But actually, we have multiple events in our lives which are transformational. The first is when we're actually born. Another big one is when we become a young adult, then when we leave home, when we get a job, when we find a partner, if we become a parent, a grandparent, an elder, when we pass on. All of those events are considered transformational and considered rites of passage, and they will happen. I often look at it like life is a staircase, and each step represents a new stage of life. And rites of passage would classically be practiced to support us to move from one step to the next step. And the big problem is that when we don't have a rite of passage, we stay stuck on a step. And that's exactly what you alluded to at the beginning. We live in a society where many are stuck on the step of adolescence. And the difference between a child and an adult is so massive that if we don't create rites of passage, we end up in a world that is actually run by children instead of being run by adults.
Which is kind of symbolic of where we kind of are right now. Like, I think it's fair to say when you look at the behaviours, even if you were to look at the Senate and the way that the people, the politicians within our Senate behave when they're debating with each other, it's almost like kids in a classroom.
Yeah, look anywhere.
Yeah,
look in
media.
look in families, look on social media,
true.
look in business, look in some of the major leaders in the world. And I wrote a model. It's worth naming when I first started around the difference between a boy and a man, because my original work was boy to men work. So I wrote a model because a friend of mine who was a professor said, Arne, if you're going to work doing boy to men stuff, you have to be able to define what's the difference between a boy and a man. So I wrote a model which talks about boy behavior or boy psychology versus healthy man behavior. And normal boy behavior is what you see in a 6 to 10-year-old. And that is, I'm the center of the universe. It's all about me. I just want more. I can never be wrong. I'm going to live forever. And I want a mother, and I want a mother to do everything for me and to be my servant and all of that. Now that's fine in a 6 to 10-year-old, and also boys don't take responsibility for what happens. It's always someone else's fault. That's all typical 6 to 10-year-old. But if you end up with a man who still thinks he's the center of the universe, it's all about him. It's all about power for him. Doesn't take responsibility for his actions. It's always someone else's fault. And he still wants a mother or a woman to do everything for him. That's a big problem. And I actually think that we have a lot of men, and we have men who are running the world who, as I say, are still acting like boys, and they're thinking about them, as opposed to healthy man behavior when we understand that, it's not just about me, it's about my community. And power is not for me. If I have more power, it actually means I can do more good in the world. And I have to take responsibility for my actions. And I'm not looking for a mother. I'm actually looking for relationships. That, for me, is a good man as opposed to a boy. And I see that we have a lot of men who are still stuck in that boy behavior. And it's a major problem when the world is run by boys, and those boys can actually start wars and make decisions that kill hundreds of thousands of people and
millions,
all of those things. Yeah.
So where did we as a species go wrong?
Look, I think...
or where did we as a species diverge?
Yeah. I think, as sort of the Western economic paradigm came in, a lot of it became about what can I do for me? So it moved from being a community-centered society to a much more individualistic-centered society. And I think that also, to be honest, got exaggerated in the sort of the hippie revolution, where instead of it being all about family and community, it's I'm going to go out and do my own thing, find out who I am, do what I want. And, there's definitely, it's good to find out who I am and what I want. But when it's done at the exclusion of everything else, that's a problem. And actually, it's interesting because there's this whole big discussion. What should I prioritize? Should I prioritize my community? Or should I prioritize myself and who I am? And I actually don't think it has to be one or the other. And the core,
is it fluid?
It can be, but this is where I find this super interesting. The core essence and reason for Rites of Passage is it's about the journey of the spirit. It's about the journey of who you are and what your gifts are and what you bring to the community. So when a person is living according to their gifts and doing what they love, that is when they are in the best place and they are happiest and they are most productive. Like if I'm into music and I play my music, that's when I shine, that's when I contribute most. If I'm into stories and I share stories, that's when or if I'm into building and I become a building, that's when I thrive the most. So I'm doing best, but also my gifts are then coming into the community. So it's actually what's best for the community. So if we're helping people find their true gifts and encouraging them to be themselves, rather than trying to be like everyone else, rather than bloody trying to be like what they see on social media, God forbid, which is what's getting the teenagers.
So through the discovery of self, the benefit to community follows.
Correct, if it's done properly, absolutely, which I love because then it's not just one or the other.
So you astutely describe the differences between boys to men. What about girls to women?
Okay, yes, there's definitely a model around the difference between girl behaviour and healthy woman behaviour. And when we brought women in to do the work, they sort of helped write the model. And there are a few things. There's definitely one of the really interesting one is a girl cares only for herself or only for others. Both of those are considered girl behaviour, whereas healthy woman behaviour hopefully can balance care for self with care for others. In girls, a lot of their self-worth comes through external validation. Oh, you're so pretty, you're so good, you're so clever. Well, that's very much girl behaviour. I need that validation. Whereas healthy woman behaviour is hopefully that the recognition comes from internally. I know who I am. I know what I'm about. I don't need to, get my validation from other people. And we see it once again. When that transition doesn't happen, then we end up with, unfortunately, older women who are still trying and feeling like they need to look like younger women in order to get validation, whereas they're actually fabulous and wonderful as older women. We need good older women. We need good older men.
It was interesting. I had a conversation with a friend recently who's going through menopause, and it was a real left field conversation because we've been friends for probably close to 20 years, but I've never put it in the category of someone who, chases self-awareness or self-development, but she is a self-developed human and an awesome human at that. And we're talking about menopause, and she said, you know what? It's so interesting. As my hormones have changed, I've found myself going inward. And so I'm losing this sense to necessarily not always care for everybody else, but it's almost like as my hormones have diminished, my focus has gone inward, and I've never felt so powerful as a woman. And that to me was like a real statement of liberation, because oftentimes you hear about how menopause is just so horrible and destructive and at the end of the world, for a whole gender of species, where when you perhaps think about it in a different way, it really is a coming of age.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it's one of these things where these transition moments in life are going to happen. But the question is, are they going to happen well, facilitated, with awareness and hopefully with pride, or is life going to sort of kick us up that staircase that I was talking about? We're all going to become adults, but are we going to do it with good other adults, elders supporting us on that transition, or are we going to do it through a car crash or someone dying or a drug overdose or losing our job or some disaster? And same with menopause. Menopause can be an incredibly empowering transition from the journey outwards to the journey inwards, or unfortunately for a lot of other women, it's a really depressing and distressing time when they become invisible and all the all the negative emotions that come up with all of that.
So can someone go through a rite of passage by accident?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, when I run programs and I do trainings, one of the questions I ask people, we get them into circles and we ask them to share about what was their rite of passage that was a transition from child to adult. And it might be a good one or it might be a not good one. I'd say 90 to 95% tell a really difficult story of how they transitioned to adult. And it might be an accident that they were involved in, or an inappropriate sexual event that happened, or something to do with drugs, or, a breakup or losing their job, anything like that. But generally speaking, they were they were not a positive experience.
It's interesting when you just said, we're explaining the different dynamics and context around rites of passage. For some reason, the scene from 300 popped into my head. Have you seen the movie 300?
I have.
It's where he's the young boy training to become a warrior, and then he gets given a spear and he gets sent into the abyss, and he has to hide in a cave and he's shivering, and then all of a sudden the wolf shows up, and then he slays the wolf. He takes it back to the village feed, and he is then a man. So that's a very Hollywood-esque description of what a rite of passage might look like for a young boy. But if we were to perhaps bring that into the context of what's real and what's something that we can perhaps be aware of, what other stages as a parent, and maybe we'll start with boys and maybe they're the same, I'm not sure, but being the father of a boy, maybe this is going to be a little bit of a biased direction. What are the stages that we need to be aware of in order to become present as a facilitator in that passage to help that child develop and grow into the next stage?
Great. Well, I wish more people were asking that question, by the way, because we need more facilitators running healthy rites of passage for our boys and our girls. And the first thing that we see is that they start to change, and we see that change happening, and they not only start to change physically, but their whole being changes. And in fact, what we talk about looking for is they become agitated. and they might start answering back, or they might start locking the door to the bathroom, or they might stop talking and just be grunting. But, something goes, and you can tell that my beautiful little boy is no longer my beautiful little boy, not getting into bed in the morning with me, won't let me give him a kiss goodbye when he gets out of the car at school, won't hold my hand when he crosses the road, in that sort of stuff. There's a change happening. So that signals that something's going on. And so that's the first thing that we look for.
So it's not necessarily a number-related facilitation. It's not an age-related facilitation.
No, it's not an age. So some boys are ready earlier and some later, and but it's hormonally related. Yep. So it's a puberty thing. But there are some, because of so many kids staying inside, not being allowed out, spending so much time on their computers. That age is probably later these days. So we say 14 to 17 years of age. So we want them to have had some sort of life experience so that when they go through the process, they're actually connected to what we're doing with them.
Is there a phase or a stage pre-14 to 17? Like you mentioned that 6 to 10-year-old stage.
Yeah.
Around that, almost that center of the world, narcissistic, everything revolves around me, nothing's my fault, I need someone to take care of me. Is there another phase earlier to the 14 to 17?
Yeah, look, there are lots of phases that come in there. I think there's
the dominant one is 14.
There's a big one. Well, there's a big one, 10 to 13,
okay,
where the boy's relationship with his mother is really changing. And, we actually run mother-son camps in that 10 to 13 age, because it's the thing about the rite of passage is it's not actually just about the boy, but it's actually about their whole family. So if you look at a boy who's becoming and moving into a young man, a young teenager, a young man, not only is the boy going to change, but his parents, his mother, her relationship with him also has to change. Because if she keeps treating him like an 9-year-old when he's 11, 12 years old and able to go out and ride his bike and able to go down the shops and able to do certain things, if she babies him, he's going to get pushed down into the behaviours of a baby.
You see that regressive treatment even earlier and it's not necessarily a criticism, although it is an observation, where women baby their boys, even at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9, they're still talking to them like babies. They still do it.
You've only got a 10-year-old. It can still happen when the boy's 30 years old, 40 years old. If we don't change that relationship.
That's important. It's important to evolve the language. It's important to evolve that tone and start treating them like they are what they are becoming.
Correct. And it's like if you want them to be a young adult, you have to treat them like a young adult. So actually, we need to work with the mothers as well. But we also need to work with the fathers so that they go through a shift. And they not only go through a shift in their relationship with their boy, they go through a shift in themselves. So if we look at this staircase model that I talked about, and you've got the mum and the dad up on a staircase, on a step higher than the boy, when the boy goes up a step, mum and dad also need to go up a step.
Do you think that there's some parents, and maybe this is a maternal thing, I'm not sure, it could be a paternal thing, they want to hold on to the little baby. They want to hold on to
Of course they do. Well, the mums want to hold on. They don't want to let go of their little, this is the baby who was inside them for 9 months, who they did everything for, who they spent, they would have died for this baby as a child. And now someone's going, oh, you got to, stop being so mothering and looking after them. That doesn't necessarily come naturally. So in the past, often the boys were just taken away. And, they didn't ask the mum when they were ready. And it's different with the fathers. They say with the fathers are likely to send them out too early. Yeah, my boy's ready to become a man, And so often it's the grandparents or the elders or someone else in the community who's watching and says, that boy's ready now.
Oh. So hence the importance of the tribe. Hence the importance of the community.
Because as the boy goes through the rite of passage, the parents go through the rite of passage. In fact, everybody on the staircase is supposed to be going through that rite of passage at the same time, which is why generally rites of passage involved the whole community.
Yeah, right.
So when we work with schools, for example, we involve the whole school. When they leave on their rite of passage, the whole school's out there. Or not always they're out there when they leave. Sometimes it's just the parents. But when they come back, we get the whole school there. So as they come back, everybody knows that they've been on their rite of passage and they're coming back and they're different. And one of the classic examples we see in Australia is people go away after school or at uni for 6 months a year. They go overseas, Did you do that by any chance?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so there's a lot of people go on a gap year.
Delayed development.
That's all right. You can still do it. They go on a gap year and then they come back and they say it's the worst experience of their life coming home because the people at home are still the same, but we come home different and people want us to be who we were before.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and same when people who come from small towns or villages or wherever come out and they go home, nothing's changed and people are still seeing them as they saw them when they were at school, you know.
And hence, which will oftentimes encourage or propel the child or the adult now to not want to come back.
Correct.
Or not want to stay once they've come back because then it's like you don't
and then the community loses the gifts of that child because the community can't welcome them back as an adult.
Holy shit.
It's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, I got goosebumps on that one. I think it's going to land really heavily with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so, have you heard of John DeMartini?
Yes. I've been in a film with John DeMartini.
Okay. So, which film was it?
It was the film Overfed and Undernourished.
Yeah, okay, great. I've worked with John for a couple of decades now. He's got this saying, talk to them like geniuses and geniuses they'll become.
Correct. And talk to them like idiots.
And idiots they'll stay. And so what is the fine line? Like, it's one thing to be aware of, okay, I'm noticing that there's a change, there's a level of agitation, there's a shift, there's something going on. It appears to be hormonal, prepubescent. How do we as adult parents support our own rite of passage to be able to start treating them like adults in a way that is proactive versus perhaps reactive?
Okay, great. So the first thing is we have to know that we have to do something. Yeah. And so and then we have to go through the stages of a rite of passage. So your boy, let's say, he reaches that age, 13, 14, hopefully he will go away on a program. He might come on the programs we run, or you may create your own program, or anyway. And so a period of time is dedicated to saying this boy is going to become a man or a young adult, and so this will be the beginning of his journey. So the first stage of a rite of passage is separation. The person who's going through the rite of passage leaves their community, leaves their family home, because you can't do it in the family home or in the school classroom because there are too many things holding that person in the place that they're at.
So that's the first phase of the rite.
Separation.
Separation.
Correct. Then the second stage is what we call the transformation, when they do the change, and I'll come back to that. And the third stage is integration, where they come back into the family, into the home, into the school, but they're now on a different step. And so they have to be recognized on that different step. So we have to work with the community so they know. So we'll do a live example. Let's say we were going away with you and your son.
Noah.
And by the way, I know your son.
I have no doubt you know my son.
And we'll come to that in a moment. So let's say we take you, and Noah's 14 years old, we take him away. So we would at the beginning, we would also work with the mothers. So we would have women working with the mothers, talking about it, saying how they feel about it, how they feel in themselves about their child getting older, how their relationship is with their child, how they'd like to be in the future with it, all of that. And then you would go away with Noah to a camp for, let's say, 5 days. And there are 4 key things that would happen there. The first is every day you would sit in a circle, man, boy, man, boy, man, boy, around a fire, hopefully, and you would get to share your stories. So we would ask you to talk about, what was it like when you were the age of Noah? What was your life like? And what was your life like with your father? And, 10, 20 men would share their stories of their teenage years and their lives and their relationship with their fathers. And unfortunately, about 80% of the men would have bad stories about their
relationship. We experienced that at Young Warriors. We did that, and it was really sobering for the kids.
Correct.
Yeah.
And some of the men would have beautiful stories about their fathers.
Yeah.
And then at the end, when we say to the boys, hey, if you become a father, what would you like your mum or dad your son or daughter to say about you? The answers we get are astonishing. They're beautiful. And we would have another discussion on another day about your successes and failures. We would have a discussion. You would talk about your experience with grief and loss, because the boys are coming into a world where grief and loss is going to be part of their reality, and they need to know that it is something that happens, and we can move through it, and we can learn and grow from it, but it's there. The world is not going to be perfect for their whole lives. So we have all these beautiful, powerful discussions, which are incredibly powerful for you, the fathers, and incredibly powerful for the boys to hear. We're basically doing men's work in front of the boys and allowing them to hear and ask questions. So the first thing that is always in and has always been in Rites of Passage forever is the sharing of stories. The second thing that would happen...
and that's part of stage 2, is it?
In the transformation. This is to create the transformation. Yeah. Because when they hear your stories, that transforms their mind. Yeah. It gets them thinking, oh, what sort of father do I want to be? What sort of man do I want to be? What sort of adult? What sort of relationships do I want to have? How do I want to be? The second thing that would happen is there's always a challenge. There's always some sort of challenge or ordeal. And Rites of Passage always involves some sort of challenge or ordeal. And by the way, I worked for 15 years as an emergency medicine doctor. And what I saw in my emergency medicine departments was, oh my God, how many teenagers were coming in? And I saw the boys were coming in and they had, written themselves off in car crashes or jumped out of trees or off bridges or, got in fights. And, basically what I came to realize is they were doing things to try and prove that they were men. But it was unfacilitated, unsupported, no boundaries.
Unsupervised.
Unsupervised.
Alcohol-fueled.
Exactly, all of that. So they'd end up in emergency. So if we don't create challenges for them, they're going to create their own. So there's always a challenge in a rite of passage. We also get the boys to create a vision for who do they want to be how do they want to be as adults? As I talked about, what sort of adults do they want to be? What sort of relationships? How do they want to contribute? What gifts can they bring to the world? Which is a beautiful, beautiful process, getting the boys visioning. What sort of relationship do they want to have with their dad and their mum when they're older? So we've done stories, challenges, a vision. And the fourth one is recognizing the gifts and the genius and the talent and the spirit of each boy. So we call it honoring, but each boy gets honored by his father and 2 or 3 other men. Yeah, wow. And all you have to do is look. So, I do know your son, Noah, for example. And, if you were Noah, and I can see Noah in your eyes, by the way, it's a beautiful thing to see, a child in their parents' eyes. And I could happily have Noah in your seat, and I could sit here and I could say to him, Noah, I'm very happy to honor you. And some of the things that I see in you, Noah, is you're a super talent, first of all. You're a musician. You love having fun. You're really sensitive and loving. You've got a gorgeous, beautiful, big heart. You will laugh as you will, the joy that is in life, you want to take it in and it comes back out of you. And, you're a beautiful boy. And every time I see you, you come up to me and you say hello and you're engaging and, you want to be involved in whatever's going on. And, you're a special kid and I'm really proud of who you're becoming, Noah. And that's my truth. And imagine if a bunch of people were able to say that to Noah and to regularly tell him, and there'll be other gifts that he has and talents and genius that you see in him as his father. And, he needs to hear that from you and he needs to hear that from other men. And then that starts to give him the self-confidence and the courage to be himself rather than thinking he has to be like what he sees on social media or he has to be like what all the other boys are doing. And really, that's what we want. We want the greatest love you can give any person is to tell them, I see you and I love you for who you are. I want you to be you and I love you for you. What a beautiful thing. And I know that when we take boys away, or girls, but I work mainly with the boys, and we take them away, we share our stories, we put them through appropriate challenges, we help them create a vision or allow them to create a vision, we honour them for their gifts and talents, genius and spirit, it transforms them. And then when they come back, we have a whole community there, we do a big celebration, and then we also actually give them an ongoing project to do at home with their parents so that we're really grounding and integrating the work into the family. And because I've been doing this for 30 years, I can't tell you how often I get an email or someone stops me in the street and says, oh, we did the program 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It's changed our lives. It's changed my relationship with my son. It's changed my relationship with my father. It transforms them. It does something.
So where to go from there? 14 to 17. It's a pretty significant shift you've already outlined. What are the roles of the parents in the different phases? Because you've kind of alluded to the fact that, between 10 to 13, there's a very strong mothering requirement. And then from 14 to 17, you would almost hear that you're suggesting that that requires a very strong masculine fathering presence.
Yeah. Well, look, I also need to say this is a very binary description that I'm giving here. And we're in a significantly less binary world now. So we more and more talk about it's also, yes, boys becoming men, girls becoming women, but it's children becoming adults. So it's very important that our work is, that we're able to support non-binary, gender-diverse children. And that masculine input can come from the father, can come from the mother, can come from family, friends, but it really is the positive influence of elder adults. And, the whole way that the children respond once they're young adults is they don't want to be told how to live their lives, but they do want to hear our stories. They do want to be able to ask questions. They do want to be mentored. So there's that whole shift that changes in the relationship.
How do you manage that? And I want to treat this very respectfully. I've got clients that have kids that are non-binary that have gone through transition, but they're at, I guess, and we'll call it at the extreme levels of whether you call it woke culture or otherwise. There seems to be this drive for de-genderization, de-masculinization, de-feminization. And I'm curious as to how that plays out, because I subscribe to the theory that there is energies, and there are masculine energies and there are feminine energies, and you may have different operating systems or hardware, but you can own and have core energies that are separate or different from the operating hardware that you carry. But how do you manage something so sensitive and culturally significant when you go back ancestrally, indigenously? How do you manage this completely new perspective where there is, in some cases, this drive to, and I'd call it what I think I see from my own experience and observations, this demasculination, this defeminization. How do you manage a rite of passage in a world where, kids might be experiencing some uncertainty, and the last thing they need perhaps is to be, how do I address this really carefully? The last thing they perhaps need is to be further confused through information that might make them question further who they really are.
Yeah, look, it's a minefield and it is confusing on all levels, and I don't think anybody's really got the clear right answer. The thing for me is I encourage diversity, and I feel like the more diversity we have on our programs, the better. And our basic rule is you're not allowed to tell the kids how to be. We're not allowed to tell them they have to be masculine, they have to be feminine, they have to be non-binary. We're allowed to share our stories. And I believe that when we do that, they will make their own decisions. And every child, whether they're masculine, feminine, or non-binary, every child has gifts and talents and a genius and a spirit. And if their spirit, is genuinely calling them to go one way, and we can support them to do that, whichever of the multiple options there is, that for me is when the best outcomes happen. And I think also looking back in Indigenous communities, they were very strongly masculine or feminine, but there was also gender diversity within. It's not a brand new invention in the last 20 years.
It is a lot more prevalent today.
Definitely a lot more prevalent. And we also live in a society which is different. There were very clear roles back in Indigenous communities, and those roles worked, we could say, for those communities. And in the world where we are today, it is different. But I think when we create regular rites of passage, and the thing about a rite of passage is it's actually an opportunity to go offline for a period of time, whether it's a week, a day, a month, a year. A sabbatical is a rite of passage, a gap year is a rite of passage, all of these things. And there are at least two really important things that can happen in that period when we're offline. So the first is this transition from one stage in life to the next, child to adult to, community member to maybe parent or maybe elder or maybe in partnership and relationship. And most of those things are not actually dependent, by the way, on your gender, you still become an adult, you can still be in relationship, etc. So that's the first thing, it's that step. But the other is you have an opportunity to actually review your core values and beliefs, and which are run by your story. So what I mean by that is we all have a set of beliefs and values that are locked inside our psyche, and those beliefs and values basically run all of our actions. So, at a simple level, I'm a surfer. If I know it's offshore and there's waves, that is going to drive my actions for the day, and I'm going to try and do something where I can get to the waves. If I wasn't a surfer, it would have nothing to do with it. That would not be part of my beliefs and values. Other people have beliefs and values around music. So the importance of music. So they will always be, arranging their lives to be able to do music. There are other people who have fear of groups of young men. So if they're walking down the street and there's a group of young men on the sidewalk, they'll cross to the other side of the road. Now, our beliefs and values get put into our psyche as we're growing up, and they're in there for a reason or for events. And we also have a bunch of beliefs and values that got into our psyche when we were kids and someone said something to us, like you'll never be any good, or, well, actually my mother said to me, Arne, you can do anything you want if you really put your mind to it. And that's in my psyche. So our beliefs and values, some are good, some are not so good. When we actually are in that offline space that I'm talking about, in the transformational phase, and we actually go into something called liminal space. And in liminal space, our psyche is actually open, and we're more able to see what's in there, and we're actually able to remove things and have new things come in. And so in that offline period...
So it's like an unlearning, relearning process.
You could call it that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could call it... So, and those things that come in, if it's done well, we can actually, I would say, improve what's in our psyche. And if it's done badly, bad things come into it. So if I'm in a liminal space and something, bad happens to me, or someone says something bad to me or does something bad to me, and then I come out of the liminal space, that bad thing is still locked in my psyche, and I will believe that it's true and is part of me, and it will affect my actions at least until the next time when I go back into liminal space again. Does that make sense? Yes. And same if something good happens. Let's say, a teenager is, does something. Well, you create a challenge for a teenager, and in the transformational space, and a proper challenge is you do something that you didn't think you could do. You get pushed further than you think you could do. You learn that you've got greater boundaries that you thought, etc., etc. Then you come out of that liminal space and you realize, oh, actually, I can do more than I thought I could do. I am more capable than I was when I was in the previous stage of my life, and all those things.
So is sometimes the liminal space framed around the challenge piece?
It can be framed around all sorts of things. So the liminal space, when the boys are hearing stories about older men's fathers and the bad relationships they often had with their fathers, in that child's liminal space, that child is making a decision, I'm going to be a good father. I'm going to be a father who is present. I'm going to be a father who does tell my kid I love him. I'm going to be a father who's not critical all the time. I'm going to be a father who is at my son's football games or whatever. So that's not framed. That they get that from just hearing the stories. They also get growth from the challenge. They get growth from having a vision. We know that if a person has a vision, it's more likely to come true than if they don't. So when that vision is done in a healthy way, when they're honoured and someone comes up to them and says, look, I see you have a beautiful heart and I fucking love you for that. That child all of a sudden realises, oh, my beautiful heart is a really good thing. And so when they leave liminal space, they're now actually proud of their beautiful heart rather than hiding it and pretending that they're all tough and don't care. So, the liminal stuff can happen on all levels when we're in that transformational space.
So you mentioned before in the conversation around gender diversity, the role, because sometimes, a mother can bring in masculine energy, a father can bring in feminine energy. How does a solo parent navigate, if it's a solo mum or a solo dad, in these different stages and phases of their passages where that energy might be required? Is this where the community is a big part of it?
Yeah. Look, I mean, and we know that so many families now are, single parent families, and it is really a community thing. Rites of passage at their core are a community process. And so, we have probably a third to a half of the young ones who come on our programs, because our programs are always parent and child. A third to a half of them come with someone who's not actually their biological parent. And I think that's actually a great sign that there are a lot of adults who are prepared to say, hey, I'll go and I'll support
like a big brother or big sister.
It might be a brother or sister, might be an auntie,
but I mean,
an uncle.
that old program, Big Brother, where it's like another adult will nominate themselves to be a presence in their life.
We get grandparents coming along.
Yeah,
we love when grandparents come along. We love grandparents.
Go the elders.
There's actually a saying that grandparents and grandchildren have a special bond because they have a common enemy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and by the way, grandparents and elders are. Let's come back to elders because that's also
a separate
important.
One.
That's a really important part of it, though. And classically, the parents wouldn't go on the rite of passage. It was actually that handing over your child to the community to put them through the transformation, and then when they
without that security blanket.
Yeah, without the parents being there, because the danger, for example, of a father being present is he will either stop his son going through the challenge or push him too hard. And both of those things can happen. Whereas when you have the elders, then they talk about the water's got to be hot enough so they get cooked, but not so hot that they get burnt. And the elders can manage that. And this is where, we have a lack of elders. We have older people, but a lot of the older people don't have a role, so they're out on the golf course or in their RVs as grey nomads, travelling around the country, whereas they have a really important role. And the beautiful thing is when you see elders with the young or grandparents with the young, that beautiful combination of the elders see the gifts and the beauty in the young, and they're not afraid to name it. And they also share their stories and pass on their wisdom and knowledge to the young because they have the patience and the time to do that. So the young get seen and they get the wisdom and knowledge. The elders, in return, get something to do with their stories and something to do with their wisdom and knowledge rather than it just sitting inside them and being wasted. And it also gives the elders energy, which is what they need. So it's a really beautiful...
And purpose as well.
Yeah, energy and purpose. So it's the perfect exchange. And then, on top of that, it frees up the ones in the middle, the adults, to go out and, build their empires and make their glorious mistakes. There's a really important reason why when we have healthy community, things function really well.
I'd love to see the longevity studies related to elders present in the lives of the younger generations in terms of their purpose and longevity.
Well, we know that the elders who are isolated and alone do worse. That we know that. And so, being in family, having grandchildren and looking after the young is a really special thing.
So we've referred to, that 10 to 13, that 14 to 17. We've also kind of tipped around the edges of the elder. What stage, phase, age is the elder transition, roughly?
Okay, well, once again, it's not so much necessarily age, but it's a thing. And I'm going to talk about men again because it's my real field of specialty, but I'll just say I think most of it it's similar but different in women, and I'm wary of sort of being someone who feels qualified to talk about a lot about the women's journey.
Yep,
but
that's fair enough.
In the same way as I wrote this model about boy to man, I then extended it man to elder. And whereas man is about supporting the community and sharing power and relationship and all of that, elder is different again. It's as different from man as man is from boy. So elder is very much about mentoring. I've just turned 60, for example.
You look good, mate.
Thank you. I don't need to be building, big businesses and surfing the biggest waves that I can and all of that stuff. My role, I feel very much now, is around mentoring the young and helping them.
How old are your kids?
My boys are 31 and 33.
Yeah, wow.
And I have a bunch of stepkids, and we have a lot of young people who come and stay at our property and on their way through Byron come and stay over, get a feed, sleep the night, tell us what they're doing, ask questions, all of that stuff. So the mentoring role is very important. As an elder, it's not about being right or wrong. It's just about, listening to both sides. And hopefully the emotion is, much more about love and support. And also there's a whole thing about just letting go in elderhood. So there's a whole big shift that happens there. But I now believe there's a stage between man and elder. And I reckon you're probably in the early parts of that stage, and I'm well into that stage. And it's when you have 1 foot in man and 1 foot in elder. And the word I'm describing it with is Maggie. And Magi. And Magi is the Sufi word for wizard.
Yeah,
and in that, so for example, I'm 60. I've still got some man energy in me. I can surf decent sized waves. I can, rumble with some kids, but I don't have that same strength as I used to have. In fact, when I'm at the supermarket and they ask me if they can carry my groceries to the car, I sometimes discipline myself to say yes, which is interesting. But so I've got the strength, but I haven't got it like I had it when I was 30. I see the guys who work on my property. I can't lift the things they lift. I can't go as hard as they do all day. But I also have some of the wisdom of the elder now. So I've got a bit of both. So it's actually a really important stage. And the thing is, for me, it's not about competing with the young and trying to show them that I'm better or can, because that actually holds them down. It actually has to be about supporting them up. But I believe that, the 4 big stages in man is boy, man, Magi, and then elder.
Is there a difference, and perhaps we are both not qualified to discuss this, but I'll throw it out there anyway. When you look at the elder journey of a matriarch versus a patriarch, biophysically, biochemically, it's very different.
Yeah.
Because once you become an elder as a woman, in most cases you can no longer reproduce, but even as an elder as a man, you can reproduce.
Theoretically, yes.
Theoretically reproduce up until the age of 70, 80, depending, as long as you've got swimmers.
Yeah.
Does that create any contrast in the rite, the passage, the journey, the responsibility?
Look, I think there's a huge strength in the whole women's journey. As men, you can stay as a boy. You really can stay as a boy a hell of a lot longer. I think women just right from the get-go when they reach puberty and they start menstruating, that is a whole monthly thing that they go through, and their cycles and their early internal journey gives them a whole energy, strength, and power that I know as a boy I certainly didn't have. And then
it gives almost like a body sensitivity, an embodied relationship with self that men just don't get given.
Correct. They can maybe on some level,
on some level later, but
and then,
women they become so in tune.
Yeah, and then the ability to have babies. What an extraordinary thing to grow a baby inside them, and then that baby comes out, and then they can feed it, and so there's that whole incredible power that they have. And I see in the mother of my children and my partner and her children just their extraordinary ability just to be there and to show up again and again and again and again, and it's just next level. And then yes, absolutely, I think with the whole thing with menopause. And the strength and the wisdom that they get out of that in a different way is also next level.
I certainly meant no disrespect to the journey. I was just curious because, in some of the ancient, more indigenous cultures, you have, 50, 60-year-old men who are still fathering kids, whereas you don't necessarily see that in the feminine side in some of those cultures. And so I was just curious, is there any ancestral indigenous differences in the elder journey as a man versus a woman based on the fundamentals of, perhaps being able to continue to propagate? It's certainly not a division of power. It's more a curiosity of strength.
Well, what I do know is that in the indigenous communities, the older you are, the more respect that you get. Whereas in our community, the older you are, it seems the less respect you get. And especially in women. And that is a major loss and sadness in our society. There are communities in Africa where the women with saggy breasts get the most respect because they have had and breastfed children. And when we think about how we treat, elder women in our community, where many of them say they become invisible, and the ageism and everything. It's just wrong. It's a crime. Whereas I have had fabulous elder women in my life who just have this deep, deep wisdom. And there's this whole thing around suffering, hardship, and its relationship to wisdom and knowledge. And, for the women I know who've had multiple children and experienced loss on whatever level through life and really lived a life, the wisdom and the knowledge and the knowing that they have is really quite extraordinary.
So what are some of the things that perhaps repress the development or the transition into the different rites of passage? And I think this is where I want to share my journey just for a quick moment. I'm someone who's been affected by addiction from a relatively early age. Early it was more behaviours, and I guess all addiction is behaviours, but it was non-substance based behaviours. But then as I started to, mature and get access to resources, it started with amphetamines. That was a very short-lived addiction. It was maybe for about 12 months. But then I moved in and transitioned into cannabis, and cannabis became this multi-decade battle where, because it was considered a less harmful drug, it was, oftentimes it was excused. In some cases, it was considered socially unacceptable. So, I would hide it. I hid my addictions to cannabis for a very long time. I was very embarrassed, very ashamed. But what I started to notice through my exploration with addiction was the correlation between the use of a substance and the cessation of development, in some cases emotionally or mentally or from a maturity perspective. And the reason I bring this in is because, I've been actively engaged in, I guess you could say, white knuckle sobriety for probably close to 10 years. Not very successful for probably up until maybe 3-4 years ago. But for the last 3-4 years, I've had a level of success that it's pretty much unprecedented in my life. And the last 2 years specifically, it's been a really potent experience to live in a state of purity, with the abstinence of any substances, apart from perhaps maybe once every 6 months, a therapeutic experience with psychedelics. But what I've noticed, and this takes me to the point of where I feel like it was only recently I transitioned somewhere. I don't know which phase, and maybe it was that 1 foot in. I'm not sure. I was thinking it was maybe perhaps more from a teenager to a man, because what I started to realize is the longer I held my sobriety, and the longer I hold my sobriety, the more emotionally attuned I've had to become to be able to deal with the emotions that once upon a time I wouldn't have had to deal with because I would have used a substance to suppress, repress, or distract from that experience. And it was maybe, and I had this conversation with Paula Conroy, it was maybe 6 months ago, if that, where I felt all of a sudden, I remember having this feeling like, oh my God, I think I just grew up. But it was really, it felt quite sudden. But as a 49-year-old man, I'd be probably forgiven for thinking it's either a bit fucking late or maybe that happened a long time ago. So I know this is a big loop to the question, and I wanted to frame this up because I think, addiction is something that is, in many cases, look, I'd call it, in most cases, it's an undiagnosed condition because most people have some forms of addictions behaviors, whether it be phone, sex, porn, alcohol, cigarettes, coffee, exercise, and so many of them are considered, some of them are bypassed by society's values or perspectives, or not even, I wouldn't call it tolerance. I'd almost call it like this desire for people to feel like their addiction is not an addiction, it's normal because everyone's doing it. If it wasn't everybody doing it, then it would be an addiction. But I am curious to know from your perspective, with that big frame up, what are the things, and are substances perhaps one of them, and does trauma play a role in, and maybe this question is getting too big, in the repression of the development to move people into the transition of those phases and stages that you refer to?
Well, yes is the answer.
Fuck, there we go. Podcast done.
Okay, so I'll
Sorry, that was a lot.
Yeah, that's okay. There's plenty we can talk about from there. So, I talk about this. We need to periodically have liminal space. So we need to periodically go into this place where our psyches can open and we can move from one stage to the other. When liminal space is not provided in a healthy way by elders, facilitators, by the community, then the individual has to go and look for it themselves. And the classic way the individual, we, not the individual, we will look for it is through addiction, substances. And then it's not actually liminal space, it's liminoid space. And in liminoid space, while we're doing whatever our addiction is, whether it's drugs or sex or exercise or whatever it is, we think we're okay. We think we're working it out. We think that we've solved the problem, but we actually haven't. We've just repressed it. And then we need to take more, and we need to keep doing it more often. And so, we live in a world where liminoid is actually the norm, and you can buy a bottle of spirits for $25, $30, $40 and drink it. I mean, how is it that is called spirits? We actually can drink it. So there are liminoid options, but there's a cost to the liminoid. There's the addiction, there's the relationship breakdowns, there's the health issue, there's the hangovers, there's the emotional numbness, all of that. And what you're describing is, in fact, a rite of passage because you have set yourself the challenge to be clean, to be sober, to not give in to the addiction, and you had to keep coming at it. And finally, you got to the point where you've been able to do it for long enough, then all of a sudden, bang, you feel, I've grown up. So you've actually moved that step by facing the challenge and not doing the liminoid escape, but staying with the challenge until, because I always say, with challenges, we don't know how long they're going to last. We don't know how hard they're going to be. We don't know, how deep they'll bite. It's just a matter of doing it until it's done, to the best of our ability. And exactly what you're describing is staying with it. And now you actually get the benefit of it. And you are in a different place. You're not the person you were 3 years ago. So you've actually gone through it. And the thing about, I've said it already, but I'll say it again, we need to periodically have rites of passage happening in our lives, but they're different at different ages. So for a 14, 15, 16-year-old, the challenge they often need is physical. It has to be as physically difficult as possible. They have to face the possibility even of death. They have to go through that. At our age, you're 50, I've just turned 60, our challenges become psychological, emotional, even spiritual. And we don't need to be doing the physical challenges in the same way. And when you face into those challenges at our age, that's when we get the growth.
There's two places I want to go. The first place is, I think it was a quote from Brené Brown, and she said, at midlife, there's going to be a part of you. Paul, maybe you could search this quote, or Kelsey, for Brené Brown. Midlife is going to grab you. And I think this quote is really,
I assume we edit this. So I got 10 minutes. I got
10 minutes? All right, I'll make this really fucking quick.
Yeah, we're right. I got 12.
Midlife, when the universe grabs you by the shoulders and tells you, I'm not fucking around, use the gifts that you're given. There's a different quote, but it was more related to the fact where she's saying at midlife, and I've heard this before, at midlife, I guess you'd call us in the category of midlife, that's when all of your childhood stuff comes back to be dealt with. And when you're referring to those psychological challenges, is that often as a man or even as a woman, is that some of the stuff that we have to deal with, which at some point is all the tools that we used in our 20s, 30s and 40s, they worked, but then they stopped working, and then all of a sudden we have to develop this new set of tools, which oftentimes are psycho-spiritual.
Yeah, but also midlife, we're actually transitioning from getting stronger and, unlimited ability maybe to, hey, things are starting to fall away and we're moving actually into old age or eldership. And so it becomes about a letting go. And I know, for example, I've been thinking about this lately. I've been reasonably successful externally, and a lot of my validation, I've had a good career, I've made enough money to do okay. I've had, lots of adventures. But I fully realise my journey now is not to continue the external journey, but to fully embrace the internal journey, which is, a whole nother thing again. And yes, in midlife, we have to be able to have overcome our childhood stuff, but that is only an indication that we didn't overcome our childhood stuff when we were children or when we were teenagers. And actually, when a teenager goes through a healthy rite of passage like the ones that we're creating, like the one that you're going to go through, take Noah through, hopefully he deals with a lot of that childhood stuff then as a teenager, so that stuff doesn't have to run his life for the next 20, 30 years, so that by the time he gets to midlife, he's not going back and resolving the stuff he didn't resolve when he was 16. Yep. He's actually, way more advanced.
I've got a friend, Dr. Vanessa Lapointe, and she's got this quote, pass down wisdom, not wounds. And we've debated this subject often about how important is it for our own development to receive some wounding in our childhood in order to have some of those psycho-spiritual challenges that are required to mature mentally and perhaps physically in some ways.
Yeah, well, they also call that wound the sacred wound. Ooh. And from that sacred wound, that's where the growth comes.
Yeah. Ah.
And the ones I know there was a whole article in the Australian newspaper yesterday, but I've talked about this for years, that when we helicopter and they talk about bulldozer parents now. They've had helicopter parents who are hovering over, and there are bulldozer parents who, when there's any problem, the parents come down with their bulldozer and clear away any problems so that their child has this perfect life.
Wow.
And those children are in grave danger, because the only way you can learn resilience is when things go wrong. The only way you can learn adaptability is when situations change. And if the parents are there sort of sweeping the footpath in front of the child as they're walking along, then when that child gets out into the real world, they're going to crumble. And the first thing that goes wrong, they don't know how to deal with it. And I've seen this for years. The kids have been through hardship. The kids have had, people of all ages. There is definitely a direct correlation between those events and their internal psychological growth, which is not to say we want them to suffer, but actually part of rites of passage is creating something which is not a game, which is actually hard and which is actually difficult, and creating an appropriate form of challenge so that they grow.
I love it. One more question. I want to respect your time. Jordan Peterson often talks about the importance of becoming a parent in order to fully mature as a human being. I don't want to, essentially hit people with the ugly stick who haven't had or won't have kids. But from your experience, when it comes to the rites of passage as an adult, when it comes to developing human maturity, evolutionary psycho-spiritual maturity, how important is the passage of becoming a parent?
Okay, so I talk about a staircase. Those staircases can have there are many different versions of the staircase. So for some, becoming a parent is in their staircase, and it's a huge growth opportunity. For others, it's being in a relationship is a huge growth opportunity. For others, it's just being on your own is a huge growth opportunity. So, there are many ways we can grow, and there are many things that will come along that will give us those opportunities to growth. I always say to the boys when we're just about to put them out on their challenge, I say, look, in life, we're all going to go through challenges. And what is going to determine the growth and the quality of our lives is not actually how hard those challenges are or the challenges themselves. It's how we deal with them. If we are prepared to face into them and fully do the best we can and commit to learning and growing, that's when we're going to do best. And so whether we become a parent or not, whether we're in a relationship, whether we're in a business or a successful enterprise, we will all get challenges.
Dr. Arne Rubinstein, this has been one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had in a very long time. Thank you so much for your time. We are going to finish, but I don't want to stop the support there. Where can people, parents, anyone who sees an opportunity to work with people in their community or their children, find you more about Rites of Passage?
Great. Well, the best way is on our website, the ritesofpassageinstitute.org. Rites spelled R-I-T-S. Yes, if you Google it, the first thing you'll find is a tattoo convention That's not us. And then the second thing is usually our organisation. We work with children from 7 to 17. We do weekends like you brought Noah on. We do 2-day mother-son programs at 10 to 13. We've got mother-daughter programs happening this year, mother-son programs happening in the 13 to 17-year-old age range. And I also do a lot of I do my 3-day Rites of Passage leadership training, which is about the Rites of Passage framework. And that's teaching people the framework so they can set up their own program in their own way in their own community. And I run 3 or 4 of them a year in Byron Bay. You have to come up here to Byron to do those. And I do a number of those internationally every year. I'll be doing one this year in the Netherlands and the Czech Republic. And
That's brilliant.
So if people are interested, our website.
As someone who has done Young Warriors and spoken to many people who've done Rites of Passage, I highly encourage everyone to go and check it out. It's a family, community, life, relationship changing event. Arne, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. This episode is brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for businesses. If you have ever wanted to grow your business faster than what you can right now, if you need to make more revenue, if you need more leads, if you need more clients, if you need to know how to plan your business in a strategic way in order to hit big goals, if you need to learn how to scale your business and grow your team and your business so that you have more freedom, then this program is for you. Imagine 3 days immersed with me where we cover all aspects of business, but we do it from an immersive but also an execution standpoint. We execute every step of the way. And we're looking at 5 key areas. We're looking at your psychology. We're looking at your marketing, your sales, your leadership, and we're looking at your planning and how we integrate these 5 key areas to grow your business and your brand quickly. So if you'd like to find out more information, kerwinray.com.